Welcome to the show. It's Tuesday, and we're going to talk pro wrestling and focusing on All Elite Wrestling AEW. I'm Chris Graham, joined by Ray Petree, and we had our first post Forbidden Door Dynamite last week. Ray, of course, you did a review for us last week after the show, and some big news coming out of it. As we're heading towards now All In London next month. And really two kind of bits of big news. We'll start with what the show started with, which was show started with, I guess, and then ended with uh, MJF. We the will he or won't he? He'd been hinting towards being more edgy in his first few weeks back. Full-fledged heel turn, and I love the way they finished the show out with that. Give us a report and then some analysis on how that one's played out.
Show started with a cold open, no introduction, just right to the backstage. Daniel Garcia and MJF offered to be a second. It illustrated that this was going to be a big main event. I don't think either of us expected MJF to turn heel this quickly, but it put an emphasis on the main event a little bit more than usual. Usually, these matches for these titles, like the international title, are kind of they can be a little random. They can be a little unimportant. They can seem a little unimportant. This seemed important, like maybe Will Ospreay is going to turn heel after his loss, something like that. But in the end, it was Ospreay retaining his title and Garcia being on the wrong end of MJF's heel turn. Savagely beaten. They went way into an overrun, maybe even up to 10 minutes, I think,
Yeah.
and just really gave MJF the opportunity to give the fans a reason to hate him finally once again. It was vicious. Kudos to Daniel Garcia for uh, enduring the brunt of it because he definitely was beaten pretty badly. Got cut open on both sides of his forehead. They were bleeding pretty profusely, but it was entertaining. MJF has that it factor, does he not?
I'm looking at the ratings, the quarter hour ratings of Courtesy WrestleNomics for the show, and the main event segment with the overrun, and I'm seeing here at least officially according to WrestleNomics, it went to 10:13. I didn't, that's a pretty long overrun. It's almost a whole quarter hour of overrun. Usually an AEW show starts out with a lead in from the Big Bang Theory in the 900,000s to a million a lot of weeks. Not a big lead in this week. It was July 4th week. The show was July 3rd. So I'm sure a lot of folks were, either doing their own fireworks or getting ready for whatever was going to come up on the 4th. The show started with 733,000. That main event segment ended up with it was 655, and then the overrun 647. Normally you see a drop off of, upwards of 20% from, the first quarter out to the last. I think what we saw there was the advertising of it in the sense of with the cold open, and as you said, Ray, letting us know this was going to be a big main event kept fans around. In fact, the lowest rated segment, lowest number segment, was a 647 for the 9:15 quarter hour, and then that overrun, and so the audience retained pretty largely with this one, which is a great sign for a holiday show, and without a lot of lead in there. And I think it's a testament, yeah, to the star power. And then I agree. Give credit to Daniel Garcia for taking that beating, taking the low blow, taking the pile driver off the top rope, and really selling that well. And MJF, man, I tell you what, this is the MJF we've missed. Not he came out, after the attack on Garcia, he was the surly MJF we knew from before. Slapped a drink out of a fan's hand, maybe either that or took a sign from a fan, something like that, some sort of interaction with a fan that we have to hope was a plan, but it maybe wasn't. MJF's had those kind of interactions with fans before. And there was some jawing going on as he was leaving in that tunnel. So I mean, this is I expect him to come out with actual legitimate heel heat. There will be some fans cheering him just because he's MJF, but there's going to be, I mean, and we saw it on Collision as well. But there's, he's back to being the guy that we all hated.
We knew it had to be something vile, because this guy does heelish things and is still cheered. So he had to do something that would really turn the fans on him. And I think Daniel Garcia has developed that cachet with the fans that they love him as an underdog, as a come from behind babyface. And MJF just took it to him, betrayed him, beat him like a scolded dog, maybe like Jim Ross would say. And he came out, had a very warm reception on Collision, did the classic Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, I'm going to play your theme. Will Ospreay didn't come out. He got booed. He's a master at this. This is where, while he's great as a babyface and his championship run was entertaining, this is where he succeeds. This is where he thrives. And they finally have a babyface in Will Ospreay who can really be his foil, I think, given their ages and their mutual talent and things of that nature. So this is an incredible feud to begin building towards All In. If you wanted to market this show, you have the hometown hero versus the probably the best heel in wrestling. Maybe Roman Reigns is 1A and MJF's 1B, but I think this is I don't know if it'll be the main event, but this is the attraction you want.
Yeah, special attraction match we can call. Yeah.
Yes.
You don't, some guys don't need a belt to fight over to have their big match like that. Adam Page was the not surprising mystery opponent for Jeff Jarrett in the Owen Hart tournament. I'm not disappointed that he was the mystery guy, and it seems where we're headed with him. But I don't want to jump ahead. Report on that, and then let's get some analysis on Adam Page's return.
For a long time, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. I think there's a level or a gear that Adam Page has yet to unlock, and that's he is sort of the classic cowboy gimmick. Maybe part of that is some Stan Hansen and less so Stone Cold, but he has that intensity and that authenticity that he's never really used. I think to be a cowboy, he's a little mild at times, and he came back with some fire. He had a great opponent in Jeff Jarrett, who has sort of been built as his baby face going into the Owen Hart tournament, someone who really wants to win this for Owen, and just completely snuffed out the flame that Jeff Jarrett had. It was brutal. Adam Page often can be a little stiff, and it was a good coming out party for him as a heel. And then he continued on to Collision, where he had that great match with Jay White. And I don't know if you saw it, cut a scathing promo afterwards, which I think was a digital exclusive. But I like where his character's at right now. I like especially with him and Swerve. I mean, I don't think that ever had the blow up needed. It was odd that he lost in the end of that feud against Swerve and then just kind of disappeared. So I'm happy to see some resolution to this.
He's basically 0-2 against Swerve, one-on-one matchups. I know they had a triple threat at the show in Greensboro, Sting's retirement show back in March. But effectively in those, but they were great matches. And Swerve, of course, has gone heelish. We'll see how this plays out. It feels like we're headed towards a title match at All In, but then the curveball there could be, we know that Bryan Danielson is retiring, at least retiring as a full-time wrestler. And if we're to believe even what Danielson himself has said, he's working under basically a handshake deal, even as of now. His contract should have ended if I have this right at the end of June. So his formal written deal ended at the end of June, but he wanted to stay on for All In because he wasn't able to participate in last year's All In because of injury. So you could go either way. You could have Danielson in his retirement match, so to speak, even though he hasn't said he's going to completely hang up the boots, but he could have his retirement match as a title match against Swerve Strickland. Seems less likely, but there's still that sliver of a door open with that. It does feel more though like again that a match three, even though it wouldn't be a rubber match necessarily between Swerve Strickland and Adam Page. If Adam Page is going to be I want to say anti-hero, so to speak, the guy rising from the ashes against Swerve Strickland, man, there's a lot between those two. They've put on two great matches, and we could do worse in terms of a title match at that big show.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a former champion at the end of the day. I know we're pretty far removed from that championship reign, but to have a former champion versus the current champion, given the backstory, the two matches that they've had, and then I guess the third match between them and Samoa Joe, uh, this could absolutely be. I think the Osprey versus Swerve match was great in terms of the match quality, but the build was a little wonky because they're both baby faces. This could be Swerve's defining moment as a champion. And I know we'll get to this a little later, but he is returning this week, and I'm sure he'll address Hangman Page. Although Hangman Page hasn't directly addressed Swerve, he's never used his name yet. So I'm very excited to say the least, especially for Swerve, who has had a bit of an underwhelming reign through no fault of his own. I just think that they haven't given him an opponent um, who can accentuate his talents as a talker and as a character, and how he's portrayed.
Yeah, in the in-ring part, the Osprey match certainly put over. But yes, to this point, we're maybe getting the hints that we're going to see that the swerve that we kind of gave the positivity to, even when he was a heel, maybe start to emerge again. It's 6 or 7 weeks out from All In, but I'm already starting to think if I'm booking this, I'd hate to go, for Adam Page to go 0-3 against Swerve. But on the other hand, if you want to establish Swerve as, a legit champion, so to speak, having him beat Osprey and Adam Page basically back to back pay-per-views, would be a great way to do that from that perspective.
Absolutely, and especially you have so many great guys right now that even if he does beat Hangman Page at All In, you can continue on and have him face MJF or Kenny Omega when he returns, or I mean, name X, Y, and Z wrestler. Brian Danielson at Wrestle Dream, they're both Washington natives, so there's certainly a roadmap to continue this Swerve Strickland championship reign. Selfishly, I'm a fan of Adam Page. I think we were both at the show in Virginia when he returned after winning the title, and I I think like a lot of fans, I longed for that time in AEW in 2021 when things were at that level, and I think Hangman Page is a tentpole figure in this company, but Swerve has uh, changed the landscape, and so it's hard to argue either way. But
Yeah, it's one of those things where in wrestling, sometimes you got to use a guy to help put another guy over, and it's weird because Strickland's been the champ since April, so we're talking. I mean, and it feels like longer than that, even though it's only 3 months, but he still needs to be put over a little bit. I mean, I think the first couple of months were not good. The whole thing with the Christian cage and the patriarchy was not the way to establish a world champion. They had him getting beaten up every week. At the end of shows, and he looked like they made him look weak, and didn't bring him out to begin shows, didn't give him the mic, et cetera, et cetera. And so, using the cachet of Adam Page as a former champion who had some good matches, I mean, really good matches in his reign, a couple really classic ones with Bryan Danielson, um, and even his defeat to CM Punk at the Double or Nothing. Some really solid matches in his career. He had that tag team run with Kenny Omega. I mean, he's a guy that is a guy, made man, let's just say. So, you sometimes you have to use the made men to put over other guys. Will Ospreay's already done that job, and he's not even an AEW made man yet, even though we all know how his reputation came in as a made man. But um, that's where I wonder now. I'm kind of jumping around, but getting back to MJF and Will Ospreay, which is where it seems like obviously that's going to go for those two at All In. Um, those are both guys that, don't need the win, but they're wrestling in London. I'd be kind of disappointed if the hometown guy, the UK guy, didn't get the win. Even though I would also, I mean, in a sense, I'd be disappointed if MJF didn't get a big win on a pay-per-view, but he doesn't necessarily need it.
No, MJF has repeatedly in interviews outside of AEW and for AEW has said that he views himself as an Andre the Giant type of wrestler, an attraction, a special attraction, like you said. Um, his place on the card is really up to him. If he wants to vie for a world championship, I'm sure he has that pull, that sway with Tony Khan. But I think for the show's sake, sometimes it's better to have a guy like him in the mid card to build it up, to inflate it a little bit more than it usually is. And he doesn't need to win, like you said, especially against someone like Will Ospreay, who we all know is a phenomenal wrestler. Uh, it's not like it's a slight to him if he loses to someone like that. So
I would just be careful where you put that match because it can't be the last match with a title match coming after, and multiple title matches, perhaps maybe a women's title match or two as well. But if you're going to give Will Ospreay a win, you've got to have a come down match after that because I would not want to go out there with another title on the line after 50 or 60,000 Brits get to celebrate Will Ospreay beating MJF.
maybe they open the show.
Maybe they open the show. There you go.
I don't know, but
You know, the one pay-per-view I got to work on, we wanted to put a great match at the start of the show, and that would be a great way to start the show. Even though that would also mean MJF starting two straight pay-per-views. Um, but he's a guy that has shown the willingness to think about the Wardlow. He let himself be squashed by Wardlow because that was the logical end of that feud. He's a guy he proves he can get it. There's too many guys in the last 20, 30 years who seem to think that wins and losses matter
yeah,
in a worked sport. And MJF's one of those guys who's proven in a relatively short period of time that he gets it, that the show is the thing.
absolutely. Even AEW they track the wins and losses, but certain losses don't matter. It's really who you lose to and how you lose and in what manner. And these two, like you said, about 8 weeks from here to All In, it's going to be exciting, and I can't wait to see 7, 8 more weeks of this because both of these guys highly entertaining in and out of the ring.
So some news out of the ring, since we're talking about that, there's a number of performers who've uh, uh, been missing in action. We won't talk about them all. Ricky Starks comes to mind, Miro comes to mind, Willie Hobbs comes to mind, Powerhouse Hobbs. But there was some news today regarding Eddie Kingston, and I did not know this, and Ray, I don't think either of us necessarily knew this. We knew that Eddie was injured in a match, a New Japan match back in May. Um, I didn't know how serious it was until today, reading that, okay, one, he had surgery yesterday, I think it was, to repair the broken leg. He suffered a broken leg in May, but he could not have surgery until today, or yesterday, I guess it is, because of the nature of how bad that injury was. He needed to go through 6 weeks of rehab before he could have the surgery. Looks like he won't be back for up to a year from now, so May or June of next year. For a guy who is already in his early 40s, I've rooted for this guy. I've saw him on the Indies. I remember seeing him a lot on the NWA shows with Billy Corgan, those YouTube shows. He was among the performers on those shows that I said, man, that guy needs to be in the big league somewhere. No offense to NWA and Billy Corgan, but he needs to get more recognition than he's getting here. I'm so happy for him that he's finally getting it this late in his career. And you hate to see a guy who's worked for that long to get to where he is now have an injury of this nature that puts him on the shelf for this long.
torn ACL and meniscus. I think anyone who watches conventional sports knows that that's quite the recovery. Um, I didn't know that of the severity of it. I didn't realize that I did. Well, one, I didn't know that he needed surgery, let alone that he was waiting this long to have it. Um, it's unfortunate because AEW has invested a lot of equity into Eddie Kingston, especially with the Continental Classic last year and putting that Continental crown on him. Um, say what you will about the tournament and the title itself, but he did win it, and it was a big deal. It was something that was dominating their programming for a long time, and I didn't grow up watching Dusty Rhodes. I mean, thankfully, YouTube exists and the WWE Network and Peacock and things like that. But I would venture to say he's probably the closest thing we have to Dusty in terms of kind of an unconventional body and the ability on the microphone, the way he talks, the passion that he has for the business. It's unfortunate, and it seems like AEW cannot, like you said, you named all the people. It's hard to escape the injury bug. It seems like every time, every rotation, every season, there's a handful of guys that they need that are not available. And I feel bad for Eddie because, like you said, he is up there in age, and he's, let's just be honest, he's not in great shape. So, time is valuable for him, and he could help a lot of young guys because he can talk and he can carry a segment without wrestling, and it's unfortunate not to have him on the card. So
He could be a guy if he has to, and I don't, this, and whether it's next year or a few years from now, he's the kind of guy who could transition into being a manager very easily. Especially now, the AEW hasn't used managers like managers used to be used back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even in the 90s. Guys like Bobby the Brain Heenan were former wrestlers who would get physical in matches. Even Jim Cornette, who wasn't a former wrestler, they'd get physical in matches, take bumps, and do things like that. AEW's tended to use just guys and gals, mostly guys who stand outside the ring and maybe talk, maybe don't talk. But Eddie could be a talker. He could be a occasional, guy who interferes even more than just handing a guy brass knucks or something like that. He could actually, do some work in the ring as a manager type. But yeah, use his voice to get guys over. Man, oh man, there would be worse things for him. And again, it doesn't. Hopefully, it's not in a year. Hopefully for him, he's got a few years left, as his own performer in the ring. But I can see a guy like that transitioning, and his career isn't over when his active career in the ring is over. He can either benefit you as that kind of guy. He could benefit you as a color commentator, kind of like Taz does. Um, there are roles for him once he hangs up the boots for the final time.
when I think of guys like him, I think of Matt Menard, who can still wrestle and can take bumps and things of that nature, but has never been sensational in the ring. But he's become not a manager, but a second corner man for Daniel Garcia, and I think he's really flourished in that role. Someone who can talk for Garcia in some capacity, and he's there in the ring. He can, like you said, take bumps. I think Kingston could definitely do that. I think, I mean, it's odd because wrestlers are often so short now, and managers, it's I bet conventionally I know that it's like, well, if the wrestler's not 6'5" and his manager's 6 feet, that's okay. But if they're 5'11" and the manager's the same height, that doesn't look great.
Right, right.
But yeah, I definitely think I absolutely. I mean, he can come in and help somebody in a supplemental role and uh, do the brunt of the talking for them because unfortunately a lot of young guys can't do that. So at least in AW. So
I could see a role for him. I mean, comparing him to one of the greats, but I mean, he has the potential if he were to transition in that way. Paul Heyman is a guy who has lengthened his career substantially by going from well, he was Paul Dangerously in WCW, and then he goes to ECW as a promoter booker. That fails business wise. He goes into WWE behind the scenes, and somebody there finally figured out, hey, this guy could talk. What are we having behind the scenes for? and 20 years later, he's Paul Heyman Hall of Fame manager, one of the top two or three. I mean, him, Bobby Heenan, and Jim Cornette would be, I don't know which order that would be, but those would be the three guys I would put in my top three. And but people didn't see that right away. It's amazing
Yeah.
to me to think that they had him sitting around there with a headset on behind the scenes for a couple of years before hey, put this guy out in front of the cameras. I can see Kingston. Again, I don't want to compare him to all-time greats before he's even done his first managing gig, but I can see a guy like that. His everyman kind of appeal. And he's blunt. I can see, I can see that potential for him. If Tony Khan, anybody out there is listening, I'm putting my word in for Eddie in that respect.
Eddie is so great at building a match. Creatively, as an agent, he could do great things
Yeah.
because he understands the ebbs and flows of wrestling and the storytelling involved in it. But absolutely, someone like Powerhouse Hobbs or Big Bill would be 100 times better with someone like Eddie Kingston speaking on their behalf.
Oh man, Powerhouse Hobbs, that you put him in a stable. You get some of those guys who again don't speak well for themselves, and then you mentioned something important there. I'm a regular listener to the Jim Cornette podcast, his two weekly podcast, and one thing that that fans don't often think about that Cornette talks about, not all the time, but a lot, is the role he played not only as the second to the Midnight Express famously, and then other wrestlers as well, singles and teams as well. But in addition to just being that mouthpiece and then that's outside the ring, interfering occasionally and that kind of thing, it was actually participating in helping put together the matches and put together the finishes to a point where when Cornette transitioned away from his in front of the camera career, he was a booker on the creative team in WWF at the time. He went to Ohio Valley Wrestling as a trainer, a guy who did not have a wrestling in-ring career of note, except for some gimmick matches.
Yes.
Um, but he was a guy that was so good at putting things together and putting matches together, putting finishes together, putting feuds together. Um, imagine actually having a guy like Eddie Kingston who has worked for 20 years in the ring, with that ability. Keep pushing Eddie here, but I mean, I think a lot of the guy and his acumen, and so again, that's something people don't often think about. They think that all this. I don't know how folks think this happens, but it's not organically. The smart people have to put it together.
I remember MJF made his list a la Cody Rhodes when he won the title, people he wanted to face. And of off the top of my head, the only people I don't think he wrestled on the list that he said he would never wrestle, and he wrestled like 8 of them, were Hangman Page and Eddie Kingston. And I think there's still potential for, obviously, it'll be a long, up to 10 months he could be injured. So we're talking a long ways away. But imagine those two at Grand Slam in New York, or
Yeah.
really any pay per view, but especially last year when he was holding the title. I mean, those two, talking about a feud that would draw some attention.
Two New
There's
Yorkers in New York. That I like the venue that you proposed there too.
just, yeah, I mean, I agree. I have a lot of, I hold a lot of stock in Eddie Kingston, and I think you're kind of breaking down the roster. You're talking about all around, look, wrestling and talking, speaking ability. He's up there, among any company. It's one of the best all around wrestlers. So, I mean, guys like this is, these are the things that keep Tony Khan up at night when he's booking their shows. Well, I don't have Will Hobbs. I don't have Kenny Omega. I don't have Eddie Kingston. These are guys that he has to. Well, how do I? Where do we pivot to now?
Mm-hmm. May have to call this podcast the Eddie Kingston Love Fest, inadvertently, but it worked out well. Hey, let's wrap up by previewing this week's Dynamite tomorrow night, and then what else we might know about the other shows this week.
I think this is, I said it in my review, and I just want to reiterate it. Last week's episode of Dynamite, top to bottom, was fantastic. Collision was fantastic. They're on, 2-show hot streak. I don't really count Rampage in that kind of weekly programming because it's sort of a, it's not
It's filler.
a
It's
show.
filler programming. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So, this episode looks great. We have a Stampede Street Fight. They're in Calgary, home of Stampede Wrestling, to wrap up the Owen Hart Foundation tournament. Stampede street fight between Jericho and Samoa Joe, which, say what you want about Jericho, but it'll be entertaining. A global glory four-way match between Claudio Castagnoli, Kyle Fletcher, Pac, and Tomohiro Ishii. I'm sure that will be great because all four of those guys are great.
There will be bumps. Bumps will be had.
Yes, yes. Will Ospreay will address, the audience and sort of what MJF has said over the last two shows and done. Swerve Strickland returns. And we have the two finals of the tournament, Adam Page versus Bryan Danielson, with Jeff Jarrett as a special guest enforcer. Not the referee, I guess, but as an enforcer. And then the women's Mariah May versus Willow Nightingale, who's looking to win her second consecutive Owen Hart tournament cup. So it's a big show, and this episode from here on out will really start to build out to All In because we'll know who's facing the champions. So
this lays the groundwork for the big show in Wembley, no doubt. Well, we'll watch the show tomorrow night. We're taping this on Tuesday, so Wednesday night, and then we'll look for Ray's review on Thursday. Also, then we'll know more about the Rampage show, but also the Collision show on Saturday. So look to Ray's review for that as well. Well, Ray, as always, thank you for your time, your insight. Look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you, Chris.